All right,
Okay,
so
Mr. Chair, you're recording.
all right, so let's call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could we have roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Mr. McKenna,
Present.
Ms. Pallison.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, everybody, let's see. Can people see the agenda?
Yep.
All right, very good. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Terry, can I bring up something?
No, that's out of order. Let's move on.
Yeah, you and Lisa and I have been working on. I sent that around, although I'm not sure people got it. I probably only sent it within the last hour. And whether we add that to the agenda, questions. That's sort of old business. Felix had asked us to look at it, the conflict questions. If we just add that to the agenda.
Let's do that. Yeah, why don't we add that? What do you think, Dee? Should we add that to new business?
D, is that different than B? That's different than B that's on 7B?
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. Never mind.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, very good. Aside from that, does anyone have anything else they wanted to add or change to the agenda?
No, I'll move to approve as written.
Okay, second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So
Aye.
no. All right, agenda is approved. We have no minutes, so let's take a look at our various. Oh, let's see what we got. We've just got Jeff Ron and Monica Perry. Oh, I've got here. Oh, this is just the agenda. Okay, so looking at those, any heartburn there? Oh yeah, that was in a separate attachment. Anyone have any heartburn about Mr. Ron, who's going to the Planning and Zoning Commission? Or Monica Perry?
Neither looked like they had any interests or conflicts, and so I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Second. No problem here.
All right. In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, very good. Let's take a look then at unfinished business. Incredibly, Steve Strom still has not gotten back to me. And so, I don't know, should we just give up at a certain point and submit that one as is, or have some sort of newfound hope that it's going to get completed?
I think we ought to impose sanctions.
I know, right? I mean,
Can we do that?
I will have to, as you will see, I spent the time that I would have spent working on this trying to learn how to make flow charts. And so, oh yeah, you're in for a real treat here. So at least I was doing something board related. So minimally, it's not done. So let's move on.
Hey, Terry.
Unrelated story. Let's find a new chair to run this damn committee. Yes, I'm sorry, Dee. What's that?
Why don't you and I just set up a quick meeting to finish off that opinion?
Sounds good.
Before the next board meeting. It's just serious. I think two people could get it done much easier than one.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah. So yeah, let's convene and you and I, and we'll figure that out. Okay, news, man, we are just blowing through it. This is great. So new business. So yeah, how about this getting added to the agenda without my consent? Nice, Jennifer. Nice little coup there. That's great. So are there any other complainers who want to take over? And no, and so in all seriousness, we're supposed to do this once a year. It's probably not a bad idea. I'm not even sure which one of us is the vice chair right now, but it's probably not a bad idea to kind of shake things up. So
Nor am I, Mr. Chair, and I will just note for the record, I don't believe there's any term limits. So the board could certainly keep its chair in place.
So this is okay. All right. So this is sort of like a Capitol Hill riot. I get that. That's okay.
I seem to remember that Mr. Carlson was the vice chair the last time we did this, but obviously.
Nice. Well, would anyone like to take over as chair? Why don't we start with that? I'm perfectly happy either way. So I've been chair for forever. It wouldn't be bad to get some new blood and a new face, but
If we could, Mr. Chair, we'll just open it for nominations. So anyone on the board can nominate anyone else in the chair and vice chair positions.
oh, excellent. Okay.
As the most junior member, I nominate not myself. I would be more than happy to support the candidacy of either of my compatriots.
Dr. Professor Kelly, without going too far into it, I would love to have you continue your, steady-handed leadership of the board. Is that something you think you're going to be able to do for the next year until we have to do this again?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to nominate the Professor Dr. Kelly continue as chair, and I would volunteer myself to vice chair if that's.
All right. I will nominate Jack McKenna Esquire to the vice chair.
And I'd like a title of some sort, like czar or something. Yeah. I support both of those nominations, or whatever I must do to vote.
Okay. Okay. Well, all those in favor of, so how do we conduct the vote now, Jennifer? Do we?
I believe we can just do it by motion. So Ms. Pallison could do both through one motion.
Okay.
I move for the next year on this board to have Professor Kelly maintain his chairmanship, and to have Mr. McKenna appointed as vice chair.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. All right, that passes. Okay, very good. Yeah, and we will have to figure out some sort of title for Aisha, so we'll have to. So good. B. So let's take a look. Updated questionnaires for the conflict of interest analysis. So D, take it away.
Okay, and so that was Terry, myself, and Lisa. We've met a couple of times, and it arose. Did people see the thing I sent around within the last hour or so? And it had sort of an introductory thing, and then actual areas. And the genesis of this is that, having watched many assembly meetings, I could tell that no one understood what those questions meant. I knew what the interests were they were trying to disclose, and they were not even close to how they were answering the questions. And so one of the things I fundamentally realized, they didn't understand definitions, like what is a financial interest and what is a personal interest. So initially it was, hey, let's try to figure out how to make these easier. And then the three of us got the bright idea, well, why don't we put it in categories? Like, if you're disclosing an employment issue, these are probably the 4 questions you need to ask. You don't need to ask 7 questions. And if you work for a company, or you own a company, or own an interest in a company. So to find, 5 or 6 routine types of interest, say, okay, here's the 3 or 4 questions. I mean, they can always ask more, but again, they literally ask all 7 questions for every interest. Half of them don't apply, and most of the answers don't make sense when I actually know what the interest is. So it was something to be helpful. What I did not want to do is turn this into a conflict of interest manual. It was meant to be a page or 2 handout, and it got bigger, got a little bit bigger as we went, because we realized we really did need to say, okay, here are some definitions. You need to know what a financial interest is before any of you can disclose or vote on it. And so the thing that's these were our categories, and I had done a little attachment, Terry, that was the lead-in introductory paragraph to that. Remember what we worked on yesterday?
Right.
Yeah. And so to start bringing this aboard, I mean, it needs a little bit of work, and we thought, well, we're going to have time at this meeting, we could work on it. If you went up a little bit, scroll up. And then we thought, well, some of these are very tree-like, and so Terry was going to work on a tree, a decision-making tree. But maybe if we just read this part, or you can show your tree too, Terry. So anyway, we need to review an introductory paragraph, then like 4 or 5 categories that will be helpful to the assembly people. I think they will be internally grateful for this. And then see if Terry's tree also helps. decision-making tree. Terry, do you want to show your tree to see if that
I came up with a tree for one of them. Let me see. That's going to look like. Let's see. The sharing tray is not happy. There we go.
Can you make that a little bit bigger, Terry? And I think I can make mine bigger too. So
let's see. I think that is. Yeah, this is kind of.
There you go.
This would have to. This is. Yeah, it's kind of messed up. I'm just figuring out how to do this. But at any rate, and I don't know if it's helpful or not, but this would be the idea. Oh, geez, why is it doing that? There's something like that. It could be arranged a little bit more slickly, right? But that would be something like the idea. Yes, Dee? Is that a?
Yeah, but now looking at it, and I was pretty enthusiastic. Now looking at it, I can see why they probably want to ask the 3 questions versus an immediate no. Like, does this very directly no? And then to stop there, I think they would be concerned. What about the other ones? So even though we logically know that you could, exit right and have a no, my guess is they'd be more comfortable asking, like, for instance, all 3 of those top boxes. Otherwise, it will confuse them to go from 7 questions to 1. I think this will confuse them.
Okay. Yeah.
But let's keep it in mind. My initial just looking at it will confuse them versus here, whether you're an employer, here's the 3 questions that matter, or like they don't even understand that if you're disclosing you're an employee of an organization who may be affected by some legislation for the assembly, how that even matters. They really have such a non-understanding, and I think Jennifer has probably witnessed a lot of this too.
Let's see. So can you see the interest questions then with the definitions?
And so if you go up a little bit higher though, Terry, let's just look at that. So this is the only thing it's going to say before we get into the meat of it. Because again, I wanted to try to keep it short. And I thought, Terry, maybe I should take out the not generally understood. They also rest on a number of definitions, and I could leave out not generally understood. Terry and Lisa laughed when I said that. Mm-hmm. But probably we should take that out.
Yeah, it's a little pontificating.
But saying they also rest on a number of definitions, I thought was okay because then we get right to the definitions. And again, they have no idea what a financial interest is. And this is the hardest one. They don't understand a financial interest includes if you're a director, officer, employee, or an owner. Mm-hmm. That's just confusing to them. Whereas this is sort of black and white. Okay, yes, you have a financial interest, so now we're going to go down to the substantial next. But then the other thing that they don't understand is that private interest, and that really comes up a lot. Like Dick Cheney, when he brought forth veteran tax exemption stuff, is that a private interest or a public interest, or a restaurant owner? All our mayors seem to have interest in restaurants. Well, if it's the downtown improvement district assessment, which is increasing, by another $15,000, that probably is a private. Even though it's held publicly, it's a substantial private interest as well, versus say a general changing food codes. Everybody in all restaurant companies have to deal with that. So trying to get that across a little bit. Most of these are examples the assembly people will relate to. But this is where I think I need the most help, because the definition is only the first line out of the code. But nobody knows what that means. So trying to find examples that are simple enough. We started batting around certain examples, and some of them are way too complex. that it's just, and like the last one I thought was helpful, own a business on Smart. Well, that's John Weddleton. He owns Bosco's. And they've had this enlargement of Spenard Road numerous times. So, did you just take that out? Or you put it up front?
I just moved it, yeah, because we talked yesterday about it might be a good idea to start with one that is an example of a private interest.
Yeah, okay.
Because the veteran one's not, right? I mean, the veteran one is one we're saying that is.
That might not even be a good one, to tell you the truth, versus I do think the food service one, the difference between a food code, that everybody has to deal with food codes. Every restaurant in Anchorage. Does that make sense to the rest of you?
Well, that makes sense to me, right? I mean, like if you own a restaurant, and you're updating the food service code, then that's a huge class of people that are affected by that, and so you may gain from that. But at least in the past, we've read that as being something that accrues of a large group.
Yeah.
And that would making it okay.
But then you have like what about if they were changing the hours for alcohol consumption? That might belong to a large public, but it's pretty substantial. So see, that's how all of a sudden substantial matters. But it's like these are the gray areas. That's where you start asking questions. In fact, I would assume that changing alcohol would be a huge factor for all the restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody recused themselves when we had the bar hours downtown, or that they had to stop at a certain time and then they had to serve them food, or so. I can't even remember what it was.
As part of the EOD?
No, in the past when they had the bar hour closing stuff, and they're trying to have a period of time so people could leave the bars over like an hour period of time instead of everybody leaving the bar in the same minute. And then of course there were safety run-ins with that.
This makes sense to me. I think I'd put in the examples, I'd maybe put the large contract first, just because that's sort of clearly the private, and then the Spenard Road is kind of getting a little closer to the gray area, and then food codes are public.
And that's an interesting way of doing it, Aisha. Just do it by, what is sort of clear at the beginning becomes less clear as we go down through examples versus private and financial.
Yeah. I think it's generally good to have the examples because then it actually means something to somebody looking at it. So
do we put after that first line, so we've defined it now, that it's probably a private interest, and it's financial. Do we put at the end, assembly to determine if substantial?
Wait, yeah, is it? So you're asking 3 questions: if it's public or private, if it's financial, and if it's substantial?
Yeah. So should we just say that once you make these other ones, if it's not, see if that's where Terry's decision-making tree was hopefully helpful. Financial, because member is see, because you have 3. If it's financial. So maybe it's financial because member, maybe that goes first. Then the second part is private because it does belong to a large group. So 3, so assembly makes decision of substantial. So maybe just our order is wrong. I mean, you're hooked because it's financial. You don't get out of it because it's public. And so that means the assembly does have to make the determination of substantial.
Okay. Or do you just want to use these examples for the public versus private distinction?
No, for all of them, really.
For all, okay.
Yeah, so you're right. We're intermixing them all.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. Actually, you're right there. We're just intermixing them. So would it be better if we didn't do that?
Well, for these 3 examples, we're not going to be able to say if it's substantial. So I'm
No.
not sure that we need to add to all of these that the assembly decides if it's substantial, because that's going to be the case for all of them. Like, I wonder if we should use different examples for financial versus not financial, or maybe we don't need examples for that. Maybe the explanation that you've done above for financial interest is enough. And maybe these examples could just be for public versus private.
Yeah.
Is that cleaner, maybe? Or you could do it what Terry's doing and use these as examples and go through all the steps for these
Yeah,
examples. But
that might help because then we're combining the substantial in there.
I think it's worth emphasizing to them that they have to then decide if it's substantial, because that seems like that's a point that they get tripped up on, is they.
But you have that down. You have that right. You have below. You have that below. Sorry, I'm pointing at my computer like you can see. You have down below, once it is determined that a financial or private interest exists, the question is whether that is substantial.
But I do like how this format stands out. The assembly decides is substantial. So even though we put that in yesterday. So can I suggest, Terry, is to do the second one similarly to what we did with the first one, to see how that looks. So it would be, no, I mean, you're leaving that alone, right? So you would start after on this first line, Terry, issues enlargement Spinard Road. And then you would bullet point, arguably a private interest, not do you see what I'm, oh, I see what you're doing. You're not right now. You're getting them fancier than me. But do you see this, Terry, after issues enlargement Spinard Road is then to bullet point after that.
How's that?
Yeah, see, I like that right there. And then I think that 3-1, the restaurant's a good one because that confuses them as well. It's like they think if something touches, like food services touches a restaurant, but it is a public interest, but the assembly still decides if it's substantial, like it would be if it was an alcohol, change in alcohol. And I don't think we have to get too complicated. Again, they just don't understand the most basic part of this. And if they could start thinking of financial and private and substantial, those 3 words are where they should be looking at in the long run.
Yeah, so what do you want to say for number 3 then? What's the...
Let's see. Well, I would say it must be disclosed because there is a financial ownership interest. And then you could say the next line appears to be public, shared by large group of restaurants, but its assembly decides if substantial.
Just to make this more complicated, does it make more sense to do 3 bullet points? And the first one is financial. If we want to key in on those words, the first one is financial, the second one is public or private, and the third one is assembly and decides if substantial.
Right. Terry and I and Lisa were getting all, wrapped around the whatever you call that, and I said, oh no, let's just bring it to the group. Well, let them do this.
And which question would you ask first, the financial question or the private question, or does it matter?
Well, probably financial, because that's what gets you. Because the private is almost an exception. That if it's public, you maybe don't have to go to the substantial, but so it is the financial that's first.
So for the third example, for the food codes, you'd still want them to disclose because they have a financial interest in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Terry, wouldn't the must be disclosed be up with the financial? So financial because members employed dash must be disclosed. Because That's where I would put it. That's why it has to be disclosed. But then it's private, and then so they have to decide if it's substantial. They don't get out of it under the belongs to a large group.
And Terry, just maybe put your, I think both the must be disclosed should either be at the end or at the beginning of each of those bullets under each example, just to be consistent.
Yeah. What do you think at the after saying it's financial or private?
No, I would do it after the financial
point, or what do you think?
I would do it after the financial because that's why it has to be disclosed. It's a financial interest. To me, the private public is whether it gets out of the conflict, not out of disclosure. It's an exception. So I wouldn't put the must be disclosed on that second line of the first example. So you do the second one similar, must be disclosed, or maybe you say, let's see, must be financial because member is owner. Financial because member is owner on the next, on number 2, Terry, must be disclosed, and it's because member is financial because member is an owner.
So Dee, I'm just looking at the code here. The code says you have to disclose, public servant shall disclose financial or private interest for determination
Right.
of whether they are substantial.
So this might be actually a good example. Spenard Road, whether it's going to be expanded or not, is that a private.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question would be like, can there be, and I think this is one of the things we wanted to bring to the group, can there be a private interest that needs to be assessed that is not necessarily a financial interest? And
I think so.
the example I gave Dee and Lisa yesterday was years ago, the board decided that Mayor Sullivan had a private interest in his father's estate because he was the executor of the estate. So he had a fiduciary relationship to the estate, but he was not a beneficiary of the estate. So he had argued that he had no potential conflict because he was not a beneficiary, therefore had no financial interest. He argued, well, your trustee duties in light of that estate gave you a private interest in the matter, and the code talks about that too. Now, that would get looped back into financial interest because we now read financial interests as including directorships and things like that. So it could be that we put all fiduciary relationships into that kind of interest, or we keep it separate. We keep it as private. Can you think of other kind of examples where it wouldn't be a financial interest, but it would be a private interest?
Well, the other example we have that is when the assembly extended the election dates. And some of them were already weren't running for re-election. It didn't really matter. And we said, hey, but I don't know why we thought that was a private interest, that they get to be assembly for 3 more months. Actually, now that doesn't make sense to me, so never mind. So,
but you're right, that is an example because what we said was even the money aside, and there was enough money to call it a financial interest, but there was a private interest in extending your term of power, right? I mean, and so even if you didn't think that it was the finances, like what one assembly member said, I lose money by being an assembly member. I'd be making more money if I was a full-time lawyer. It's like, yeah, but that's really not the point. The conflict is that you're voting to extend your own term of power. So it's power and prestige that you're securing for yourself. Maybe that doesn't get cashed out literally in cash, but it's an interest nonetheless.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I tell my students, what are the sources of conflicts of interest? It's the P's: profit, prestige, power, and personal relationships. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
And
go ahead.
Sorry, Dee. Yeah, I agree with Terry. I think just even as the way it's written, I've always seen it as being 2 different types of interests, both of which need to be disclosed. And determine whether or not they're substantial. I say always, and it's my vast experience on the board, but just reading through the code and the way it's written, it seems like both are things that could either together or separately lead to someone having a conflict of interest. So I think that it must be disclosed after both of them.
What do you think about that?
Maybe indent that over. I don't know. Is there a way to say that that applies to both of them, or either?
Oh,
Either or both. Both must be disclosed before.
Take out the because, maybe.
I wonder if maybe we don't need to include the must be disclosed in these examples. Like these examples can just be to say whether it's financial, whether it's private, and then assembly decides if substantial. I wonder if the narrative about what happens if there's a financial or private interest makes more sense, like up above. Sorry, without seeing it, it's.
I think you're right, personally. Now that you said that, I think just taking that whole line out is fine. You got financial, you have private, assembly decides if substantial. Jack, do you think we don't need to say it twice, do we?
No, I think we could say decides if either is substantial or something like that.
You could do that, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Let's see. Well, then I guess we better say up here somewhere that they should be disclosed, right? Because that's a problem
Who did that?
time too.
Assembly members are charged with disclosing financial and private interests.
Oh, there, my goodness, I read right over it. Yeah, okay.
Lisa forced me to put that in yesterday.
Good job, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think one
Okay,
is
so
done.
if we're going to do it that way, yeah. So let's think about the other two examples then.
Makes me nervous when you do that.
All
You
right.
don't have
So
the whole thing.
oh, why are you not going in the right spot? Ah. Oh, there we go. Look at you. All right, financial, because
Ownership interest.
Members honor.
Maybe, or you could put holds business interest.
Yes.
I want, it's not just the business, it's any interest, even though in that case it's the whole business.
Can we just say member is owner, like we've done above? Just
Well, I'd like to not do that because they could just own a slice of the pie and they'd still be in this.
Could you just say has ownership interest?
That's what I'm saying, holds business interest. Oh, I see, in the top line. Yeah, sure. All right.
okay.
I wonder if we want to hedge that just a little. I mean, Bernard Road, what if it's, I don't know, a road that's a block long? I mean, I think we maybe because it does not belong to it wouldn't be every business on the highway, right? I mean.
Well, you could put, how about private, because arguably does not belong to a large group.
Or arguably private, because belongs to a.
Yeah, why don't we just say
Small
that?
group?
You know, they get to weigh it.
Okay. How about the third one then?
Well, it's still financial, right?
Yeah. This is still financial because ownership interest. And then
Mary,
it
how
would,
are you enjoying this typing while everyone is talking at you and watching you do it?
Oh yeah, no, I'm a pretty bad typist as it is.
and then it wouldn't be private because I would argue that it arguably public because it applies to a large group.
It's funny. I feel like that's sort of on the gray area because it's
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
it benefits everybody, but it applies most stringently to restaurant owners, right? So it's like the benefit accrues to everyone that eats at a restaurant, but the burden falls on an owner.
And I think that, the thought here is if it falls on 1,000 restaurants, it's not private. But that is the gray area where the assembly has to weigh in, just like the Spinard one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm having a little more trouble with the Spinard one. Again, not having participated in a lot of these. I mean, Spinard Road has a lot of businesses on it.
Yeah, but let's say it's got 50 businesses. Those 50 are totally impacted. There's no way that that's not, to me, a conflict.
Yeah.
But that's where they have to determine.
Aisha, are you saying that you're having trouble with that one? Not because of whether it's substantial issue, but because of whether it's really private, whether it really does belong to a large group. I get that.
I'm having trouble with the definition of large group.
I hear you, because what is large group?
Yeah.
And how do you look at that large group? Do you, and Jack kind of raised that issue even for the food service one. Do you look at just the folks who benefit from it versus the folks who are burdened by it, or all of them, and what is large? So that is the challenge here, is to get them to understand that we're not really trying to tell them necessarily what the outcome is for every time you have a question about a member owning a business on a road in the muni. Yeah. This outcome is still very fact specific.
Yeah.
And what is large, we're not really opining on that necessarily.
But wait, now just to be difficult, I'm having a problem with the third one. I thought our third one was supposed to be the example where you didn't have to disclose it because it was a public interest.
No, you have to disclose it, but it's whether it's not a conflict because it's public. So it could be
but we're not getting to assembly then decides if it's substantial.
No, we still are. So, because they have to weigh that. Maybe the second bullet point should be question whether private or public. Maybe this here, question whether this is private or public. I would argue it's public because it applies to 1,000 restaurants. But then the assembly decides if, I guess it could decide both. Or makes this determination. And if private, then they have to decide if it's substantial.
But here, it's so clearly financial. So that's got to be.
Yeah, right? They have to disclose it. It's financial.
I don't even think we need to say err on the safe side. It's like disclose.
Yeah, I think if you have a financial interest, you have to disclose. So
it's clear.
You have to disclose. The question is, do you get out of it by because it's public? But it definitely has to be disclosed.
Right. So you, as the restaurant owner, you'd come in and say, "Hello, assembly. I have this conflict. I believe it's financial because I'm the owner, but I believe it's public because it's going to affect all 1,000 people with a restaurant ownership interest in Anchorage." The board or the assembly is not then going to decide if it's substantial, right?
I think they would. I think they're the ones that decide whether Well, I guess they're double checking whether it's private or public. To me, let them decide whether it's substantial all the time, and private versus public is just one factor.
Wait, but that's okay, but that's different from okay. I think I haven't seen this in like actually happen, but then that's a different set of questions. I mean, the point is that you're supposed to be able to get out of the assembly determining if it's substantial, if either it's not financial or it's not private, right? I mean,
yeah, well, if it's neither,
Or if it's neither, if it's
neither, but then why are you disclosing it?
right, but no, I'm not saying if it's neither. If it's one, so this one, if it's financial but it's public.
No, if it's financial, you have to disclose.
Right.
Then the question is it private or public? Does that help at all in the assembly's final determination? And the assembly most long, just like we're weighing in where we can't figure out if it's private or public, that's the time they should ask 3 more questions.
Well, and the way this works in practice is just after a disclosure, the assembly chair always makes a finding. The chair always rules one way or the other.
After they ask all the questions is the problem.
Right.
Right. Well, I think what's confusing is that one of the criteria for whether it's substantial is whether it's public or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be so I think that's what's confusing and potentially kind of not as well laid out as it could be, that you have to disclose an interest if it's private. And so in that sense, having disclosed it, it's going to meet at least that test of the substantiality test. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
if you've disclosed it because it's private.
Yeah.
Well, that's always going to be harder if it's only private and not financial. And Terry, can I ask you on this first sentence? I would take out "and member could stand to gain." If they have an ownership interest, they're hooked. They don't have to have a gain, or it could be a detriment too, like the expansion of the downtown business district. So then the second, if we stick to leaving private public there, maybe we say, is this interest private or public, because it affects all restaurants. And this was confusing during the Sullivan era because we had that restaurant there behind City Hall. But again, every time you have a little bit of change, like the change in the food codes could be, you can't have open pickles. I mean, it could be nothing. And they really is that that belongs to all restaurants. Or maybe that's not substantial. But yeah. I mean, the number of laws that affect businesses, they're constant.
I guess this still isn't making sense to me, just because that isn't what we've said in the rest of this document. I mean, we say once it's determined that a financial or private interest exists, the question is whether that interest is substantial. But that's not quite right.
Well, I think you're right, because the private versus public to me is a factor in reaching whether it's substantial.
But I think what we're running into is, and Terry, I think, is what he tried to point out too, is you've got two ways you can have a conflict of interest, either a substantial financial one or a substantial private interest. But one of the factors that you look to determine whether or not it's substantial talks about whether or not it's part of a large class or not.
Yes.
So that's subpart 5, but those are different things. You can have a private interest that it turns out a lot of other people have that private interest, so it's probably not substantial. But that doesn't mean it's not a private interest.
So what's the line between private and public interest?
Well, maybe the confusion here is that we're looking at private interest definition in the code versus what is not, versus a public interest, which is meant to mean all sorts of people, that we're using private in two different ways. Private as defined in the code, and private as the opposite of public. Maybe that's where our confusion, because it really,
yeah, private interest as a term is defined in 180.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first line of our thing up there. It's an Terry now. And that's that first line. We actually put that in our introduction. I'll see, but that one uses the
Dee, I mean, but that is helpful because that definition actually is slightly different, and it could help us with, you should. So the disclosure requirement is a bit broader than private interest as defined as a substantial in the substantiality test. So the idea could be anything, any interest that you have that is not shared by the entire public needs to be disclosed, but it may be that you share that interest with a large enough class of people, like veterans, such that it's not a conflict for that reason.
And that's what exactly saying.
Yeah, so if you're the restaurant owner, you probably should disclose that you own a restaurant before voting on updates on food service codes. But it may be that when you then assess it for substantiality, the definition has changed a little bit. It's here in the private interest is defined as distinct from the public at large, but in the conflict of interest section, it's defined as public at large or large class of persons that one belongs to. Notice that's a little bit looser, right? I mean, so you can be a veteran and maybe that interest isn't shared by the public at large, but if you think that the class of people in Anchorage of veterans is large enough, then that might be a reason for thinking that it gets you off the hook from a conflict of interest perspective. But you still need to disclose it because it's private enough because it's not shared with the public at large.
Yeah. I just don't know how to do that.
That makes sense, but then I just think that our restaurant example needs to be tweaked because it's definitely a private interest under the non-conflict of interest definition, right? Because it's not in the public interest. So it's something that needs to be disclosed because it's a private interest, but it's probably not going to rise to the level of substantial because it's shared with a large class of people.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. So then we need another example of an actual public interest that you wouldn't have to disclose if we want to do an example of all the different kinds of things, or we just leave it as it is. Whatever you guys think makes more sense. Has there ever been someone who's disclosed something that has truly been a public interest that they wouldn't have had to disclose in the first place?
Yeah. What's her face, whose husband was a firefighter, much to the irritation of Trainee, she kept sort of disclosing votes on various, like the budget, right? I think, well, because the budget includes something on the fire department and my husband's a firefighter. And Trainee's, he was chair then, Trainee just kept saying, no, this budget about the fire department is a public issue. And so this is not even a large class of people kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he kept saying that she shouldn't even disclose it. Now she eventually met with us and we said, when in doubt, disclose, even if it irritates Trainee. But at least that was the ruling he kept making, that this doesn't even need to be disclosed because it's public, even though she has some tangential connection to the fire department.
But then we also said we did something helpful after that, but it's not worth telling you what we did helpful.
I'm glad you helped.
Got him fired? Is that what we did?
What?
We got him fired, so he wasn't a.
No, it was quite brilliant what we did, but that's outside the scope of this.
I will tell you though that one place where we had problems with this, as far as I'm concerned, is we had a conflict of interest case years ago involving what was it, the zoning board that was redoing the Title 21 or whatever, the big land use plan in the city. And someone said, hey, look, here's a problem. Like they're like making rulings about and revising that plan, but half of them are developers. And so they stand to directly gain from the changes that they're making. And we had at least one board member who consistently argued, well, developers is a large class of people, so there's no conflict of interest there.
Well, it was on
And so
setbacks.
it at least raises the question, Aisha, as you were saying, like, where is that line between when is a class of people large enough to count as a large class of people that gets you out of the substantiality problem? It still should.
But now I have a different question. So that at our food service example, though, in number 5, maybe that is the public interest. I mean, maybe updating the food service codes is actually in the public interest.
No, but I don't think it's in the public interest. That's the test.
Well, sure it is. That's what the definition is.
I don't think
Right?
that's what public means
Oh,
here.
no, I think
It means large group. Doesn't mean that it's beneficial or detrimental. You could say raising taxes, whether you agree that raising taxes is in the public interest or not, it still belongs to the entire public at large.
So the question is whether it's a public interest, not whether it's in the public interest.
Yes, exactly.
Wait, but okay, so now I'm confused again. The private versus public that we were answering in these examples is not the definition under the conflict of interest subpart. It's the definition of whether or not it has to be disclosed, right? Which is the one above.
It's in definitions, yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Which is as
Right.
distinct from the public interest at large. It has nothing to do with the size of the group. It has to do with whether it's in the public interest at large. The size of the group thing goes back to the conflict of interest analysis, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's only when you start getting into whether it's substantial do you add extra wrinkle that it could be an interest possessed by the public or by a sufficiently large class of people. But for disclosure, nothing short of an interest that's possessed by the entire public is going to get you out of the disclosure loop. Even if what's up for grabs, you could argue benefits the entire public, right? So you might say, hey, enlarging this one block of Spenard Road will benefit the entire, but that's not an interest possessed by the entire public. It's an interest possessed by the people who own businesses on that street.
I don't think that's right.
Okay.
I mean, like, I think, and I would argue about the Spenard one too, but especially the food service code. Well, either one, those are actually things that are from the public interest at large. To me, that the public interest at large is road improvements, food service code improvements, safety improvements. I mean, I just don't think, now that I think I understand it, I don't think it has anything to do with if it belongs to a large group, like the group size. That's in the substantial interest analysis. That's not in the.
Yeah, I hear you, Aisha. I think that the use of the term public interest is meaningful. So maybe we're not looking at it right, or have not been.
I mean, an interest affecting, belonging, or accruing to an individual or private entity as distinct from the public interest at large. Updating food service codes seems to me to be on the public interest at large. I don't know.
Well, that's why Dee and I think we're struggling with that one, because it does benefit everyone, right? It's like that applies to everyone. It's a it's an interest, or it's a subject that affects everyone. But the definition of private interest is an interest affecting, belonging, or accruing to an individual or private entity as distinct from the public's interest at large. See, the definition says public interest at large, but it's really more like the distinction between the interest that the person has that's private and the interest that the rest of the public has. And that's why I was struggling with the food service one, because yes, it benefits everyone and it's in everyone's interest to have good food service laws, but the impact, the burden of those laws, the added procedure, falls on a distinct group that's distinct from the public. And that's why I think that one's trickier, because yes, it's a subject of general importance and interest that everyone benefits from, but the impact of it falls on a smaller, defined private group.
Right, but I think that looking at where the impact falls would be under the substantial, because it's that impact is the financial impact, right, that you're talking about. And then you look to see whether that financial interest was substantial by seeing, I guess I'm struggling to find an example of a public interest. If road improvements and better food service codes don't qualify, what is a public interest?
I think that's probably
voting on taxes might be an example, right? I mean, if you have something where everyone or nearly everyone is paying taxes, then the particular year there's no particular impact for you that's different from the public at large.
Or even a large group like, affecting all the schools, or, something where it's a huge group of people. Or, increasing bus service, like People Mover, right? Like that's pretty obviously widespread.
But if you're enlarging the road, I mean, it's everyone who drives on Spinard Road. I mean, it's a lot of people. If it's everyone who eats at a restaurant, you're updating food service codes. I guess these just seem to me like things that are classically in the public interest. Like, this is kind of the point of government, not to get too philosophical. Like, I mean.
And that's why I don't think that applies. It's not a question of in the public interest. It's like the impact to the whole public or the impact to an individual. It's not in anybody's interest one way or the other, especially when the assembly can vote it up or down. So to me, the concept in the public's interest is not what we're talking about here. It's the impact maybe on the public versus the impact on an individual.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't help me because there's still, I mean, updating food service codes has an impact on the public. I guess I am, yeah, that's fine. I can just move this battle. I just think that in these definitions, we can't talk about group size. Group size doesn't have anything to do with public versus private in the first step of the analysis. It has to do with the second step of the analysis. In my mind, that's what I'm struggling with.
I would agree with that.
It necessarily has to, because that's part of the definition of private interest in 180O. Like that's how it's defined.
In where, Jeff?
It's 115, 180, subpart O.
That's what I was trying to find. Sorry. Sorry, I'm trying to find it because I don't have the 115, 180.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wait, but how do you get that that's group size?
No, I think that's where you're right. I mean, it's like, as it's defined, when you're thinking that you must disclose any private interest, then nothing short of an interest that's shared by the entire public is going to get you out of having to disclose it. Group size, smaller group size doesn't matter. Now, if you're trying to then decide later, is your private interest substantial? The way the
is your financial interest substantial?
Yeah, whether it's way the code's written, once you're trying to decide whether that private interest is also substantial, one way it might not be substantial is if it's an interest shared by a very large class of people. And that's in 060 E5. So I guess maybe that might be one way of conceptually, like, there's private interest and then there's a substantial private interest, right? So a private interest is anything that you have that's distinct from the public at large. A substantial private interest is one that you have that is not only not shared by the public of large, but in part, it's also not even shared by a large class of people.
I can live with that, and I think it makes sense. I still am struggling to find anything that would be, well, you said taxes. Okay, it's a public interest at large. I mean, yeah, maybe I just disagree, but that's fine. I'm not the assembly. I don't have to decide. But yeah, I think that way of thinking about it, I think we at least need to recognize that there's a difference between the private interest definition in 180 and 060.
Yeah, I think that's right. Or the way you could think about it is that there's a difference between what a private interest is, but then when you're assessing whether that private interest is substantial, there's a slightly different criteria that gets used. It's a little bit, there's a little bit more leeway when it comes to substantiality than there is disclosure, which sounds about right? I mean, the bar should be lower for disclosure, right? We should be disclosing more than necessary. And then when you assess it, some of the things that you disclose are not going to turn out to be substantial, and therefore it's okay.
I think that's probably fine. I still think we need on this chart then to say something about, I don't think it's arguably private just because it does not belong to a large group, or because something a little bit.
Oh, yeah, right, sure, yeah.
I mean, Jack, you said something a minute ago that made a lot. It's like, I think I see what you're saying. It's like the interest to that restaurant owner is different from the interest to the public. Maybe interest not okay. I mean,
yeah, on the restaurant example, I think the point I was making was that the burden impacted the restaurant owner different than the interest for the public at large.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So there could be different interests, right? I mean, it could be that safer food is in the public interest, but me making more money at my restaurant is my interest.
Or it's not even, yeah, I guess, and that's the thing is like it kind of bleeds over into financial with that anyway, right? Like,
right.
Mostly we're just worried that you're having to spend more money on food safety, which, no. Maybe it's the personal, just annoyance of having to deal with it. That's the private interest. I don't know, but it's hard to, like Isha was saying, it's hard to separate that out from the financial aspect of it, but.
Yeah.
Well, does it help or not? Like a fast food restaurant has to label their milkshakes correctly, and that will only probably affect fast food restaurants. And we have an assembly member who used to have an interest in Burger King. So I just thought I'd confuse everybody some more.
yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on how you read 180. I would still look at that example and say it is a financial interest. It's a public interest because it's an interest that affects the public interest at large because we want our milkshakes to be labeled correctly. I don't know. And then I would probably look and say it's a financial interest. The assembly decides if it's a substantial financial interest. And that might depend on how many fast food owners there are in Anchorage and what that group size looks like under the definition of 060.
What if it said Italian restaurants only had to do some type of code change?
Sure, pick on the Italians.
Huh?
Like, sure, pick on the Italians.
Yeah, that would be a private interest because it's a limited group of a larger class. So I don't know.
Isha, I'm going to point out it's St. Patrick's Day, so the Kelly and the McKenna here are going to, we're going to push it elsewhere.
That's right. I'm not the scapegoat today.
I guess I would look at that one and say it's that Italian restaurants must use non-weevily flour in their pasta. Okay, I would look at that and say that is and you're the restaurant owner, and I'd say that's a financial interest. I'd still say that that's something that's in the public interest under the definition of 180, because that's the kind of thing that's in the public interest. Maybe I'm stuck on this in the public interest, but then I'd probably look at the analysis of whether it's a substantial financial interest. And I would say that it is, because the class of Italian restaurant owners in Anchorage, I'm guessing, is not very large. And so you should not, so that's a conflict.
Yeah. Okay, well, how can we get out of this quagmire, you guys?
What's that?
I think I just lose, but I like that Terry's adding this example, because I do think that something has to be something that is a interest shared by the public. I just think I disagree on what the line is, but again, I don't have to decide, so great.
See, I disagree with you, Terry. It does require, it's financial. It must be disclosed.
Oh, yeah, right. But I don't think it has to be disclosed, right? And so I guess we need to think about that. Unless, do you want the entire
financial?
Excuse me?
Is it because it's not actually financial?
But see, we're just assuming because it affects everybody, therefore it just escapes the entire analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It actually is a financial, isn't it? Or just keep this whole example out. They think if they all share it, it doesn't have to be disclosed.
Okay. But why?
Well, we do define financial interest as benefit. I don't know if you want to get into decreasing taxes might be a financial benefit.
Well, sure, right? Absolutely, right?
If that example is not actually something that's causing problems for anyone before the assembly, and it's just to make me feel better, then I think we should leave it out.
Well, I think it would be helpful to have some sort of example, because I think part of the problem that they tend to have with disclosure is they know that in a lot of cases they don't have to disclose. It's common sense. You're voting on taxes, you're voting on the budget. Generally, they're not disclosing that, and it makes sense they don't have to disclose that. So having examples, having at least some sort of example, and working out the logic, which we don't have right now, right? Why do you have to disclose in all these other kinds of cases when you wouldn't have to disclose in this last kind of case? Now, what we've said above is, if you have to disclose anything that's financial and or private, then it looks like you would have to disclose that if you stood to gain from lowering the tax rates, right? And they probably would. So it seems like the logic, at any rate, is that you wouldn't disclose in this last case, because while you have a financial interest, it's not a private financial interest. It's one that's shared by the entire public.
But okay.
What do you think? So in other words, finance, in that sense, having a financial interest would not be a sufficient condition for disclosure. It would have to be a financial private interest.
I think if you want to rewrite the code.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, Jack. I hear what you're saying, but it just isn't what our code says.
It's like how it's easier to just knock the whole house down and start over than to redo the kitchen.
Yeah.
Right?
Personal experience there, Aisha.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Prior to official action, the public servant shall disclose financial or private interests for determination of whether they are substantial, right? So yeah. So there, the code is an either or, right? If it's one or the other, or both, right? I mean, but if it's one or the other, that's enough to trigger the disclosure requirement.
And people don't disclose because they know it's not of substantial financial interest, because everyone has the same interest. I mean, I think that's why I think we should take that example out. I think logically, I think the logic of following the code doesn't fit with common sense and the way that people are doing it, and the way that people are doing it is fine. Because we don't actually want them disclosing all this
disagree
stuff.
with that last part. I'm going to have to disagree with that last part. But it's not entirely their fault. I mean, as you can see, the logic is not entirely clear about how this works. I think we have consistently had problems with people not disclosing interests that they should have disclosed, because
So
they
like when you're voting on taxes and budget.
No, I mean, they went ahead in their own mind, people who had business interests and things that were affected by what they were voting on. And we actually have it on record, right? When Bill was municipal attorney, he was telling people you need to disclose this. And members were literally saying, yeah, I have a personal interest in this matter, personal financial interest in this matter, but I don't think it's substantial. Therefore, I'm not even going to disclose it. So
right, which is why I don't think we want to put the example of voting on decrease, unless the problem is coming up when they're voting on things like tax rates. I think we don't actually want them to disclose these things when they're voting on tax rates and budget and stuff, right?
Usually, I mean, I think tax rates are probably okay. I mean, unless here's the funny thing, right? I mean, unless the tax you're voting on is a very specific tax that's not shared by the public, right? I mean,
Reducing the taxes on all Italian restaurants.
Yeah, right? I mean,
but I'm saying if the point of this exercise is to help them do it correctly, I don't think this example is going to help them do it correctly, because technically correctly under the code, I think would have them disclose any interest in anything anytime they vote on general tax, budget, whatever. We don't actually want them to do that.
And I strongly agree with this. That is to take this section out, because I can think of a whole can of worms that arise from this whole little area, Terry, that we faced with the election moving, and all the what ifs they're going to come up with versus, okay, here's 3 concrete examples that cover an awful lot of what you guys screw up, and leave it at that.
okay. But yeah, in a future meeting, it probably would be worth, maybe the code section could use a little tweak there to make it a little bit more clear what's the logic behind when you disclose versus when you don't disclose.
Right.
And
I do like this, that this always says the assembly decides if stuff is substantial, one way or the other. That's
right. But they don't decide. But they don't decide whether you adequately disclosed, right? I mean, so that's
us.
That's one reason why it's worth making it clear, right? Because if they fail to disclose something, someone could always file a complaint against them. And even if it turns out the interest is not substantial, if they didn't disclose what they should have disclosed, if they didn't disclose a financial or private interest, even if not substantial, then they're in violation of the code.
Yeah.
Okay. Dee, can I ask you a question? And Terry, you guys who've, have gone to the assembly and kind of seen this in action, is our goal here, I mean, what we've written here really leaves the impression that the struggle for these folks, at least initially, is whether or not they even need to disclose something. They struggle with what constitutes a financial interest. They struggle with what constitutes a private interest. And that's really the problem. What we haven't done here is gotten into how you look at any of those factors that determine whether an interest is substantial. Is our goal not to even get into that with them? Is it really just to kind of hone in on the issue of whether or not they have a financial or private interest?
I don't think we should say what's substantial. That's an assembly thing.
And I guess the only reason I asked that question, Dee, is just to make sure that some of their challenges don't have something to do with what those factors are and how they look at those factors for determining whether something's substantial. I was under the impression that they didn't know what some of the words meant and some of the factors that need to be balanced.
They don't, but that's what the next part of this does.
Okay.
Is that we have it by groupings. If it's an employer or an employee ownership, here's the factors that matter. Just ask these 3 questions.
That's our next piece.
Yeah, that's another half of this.
Yeah, as it turns out, I think the main focus was supposed to be helping clarify for them how to go about determining whether it's substantial.
Yes.
But even in trying to lay out these definitions to get the ball rolling, I think we've already kind of run into some problems where at least the logic, the practice isn't too bad. But the logic is not clear as to where you disclose and don't disclose. And I think that does kind of trip some of them up, and they don't disclose things that they should.
Well, remember the sort of the angst that we got when we had the opinion for the Girdwood Board of Supervisors about trying to define what an interest was in that situation. I remember they were complaining, like, we have to disclose everything. It's like, yeah, you do. Like, it may not be substantial, but you do have to disclose it.
Yeah.
You know, Dee and the gang, I hate to say this because this is a great conversation and it's very productive. But Cheryl and I got a little bit crossed up today, and I need to go pick up Elias. So I hate to say it. I need to go.
Do not forget your child, Terry.
and so yeah, sorry about that, but yes, I've got to get rolling. So Dee, what do you suggest? How should we proceed?
I actually think it's great to take a break here because I think we've been wrestling with all sorts of concepts, and now to look at that second half that we sent you those. We only covered a couple categories, so I think it's fine. I think I'd rather do this another time. Do we want to wait an entire month? I'm not sure about that. And can I just say real quick that the Jason, the chief of staff, is sending forward a candidate, and hopefully they'll be appointed on Tuesday night.
Woohoo!
So, and we might as well disclose it. Lisa, what was his full name? Rabbi?
It's the Rabbi Adam Goodstein from Beth Shalom Congregation, and he's, assuming this goes through, he's very excited.
Great.
Excellent.
Yeah. So anyway, the only question to me is, do we try to meet in 2 weeks while this is still fresh in our mind for an hour, hammer out those categories? Because it did initially start out as, hey, what questions should go which category? I think is really more what the assembly was somewhat looking for. Then we realized quickly how they didn't understand definitions. Now we realize it may be a code problem, but at least to give them, when you're in these 4 areas, here's probably the 3 or 4 questions you should be asking. So, I mean, are people willing to meet, say, in 2 weeks to finish this, or do you want to put it off for a month? And Terry, I'm thrilled you had to leave personally. I would love to break, and we don't have a quorum, so.
No worries. I can meet in 2 weeks. That would be the 31st. Are people good for that, the 31st at 2?
And Jennifer, is that possible for you?
Probably not. It's election season, and the assembly just scheduled about 6 additional very long meetings. So
Okay.
it is probably okay. The 31st.
And
Would it be?
we made this. Go ahead.
Would you be willing to do it sometime next week? Would that be better, Jennifer? Or is that equally awful?
That would be worse.
I'm sorry.
For me, but I mean, you could potentially meet without me if Lisa wanted to record the meeting via Teams and call roll. So I don't think that it's requirement that I be there if the board wants to meet on the 31st.
And Jennifer, I was going to make that suggestion because this could be a continued meeting, so we don't have to have an agenda. We don't have to do a bunch of the stuff, right? That you normally do for a new meeting.
Well, I can whip you up an agenda. I don't know if it can be continued, Dee, since we're adjourning.
Oh, because we lack a quorum, but can't we continue it before we?
Yes, you could make a motion to continue.
Motion to continue, and that just makes it easier for the clerk's office.
when would you like to continue to? The 31st at 2 p.m.?
Terry, would that work?
Well, that works for me if that works for other people.
How long do you think that will last, Dee? I've got a doctor's appointment at 4.
I would say hour and a half. Well, let's just limit it to hour and a half.
I could maybe do an hour.
Okay, let's try an hour. Do you want to try that?
I think
we can do it in an hour. I actually think we can do it in an hour. As hard as those factors are, I think a lot of the really hard stuff was today. Being the eternal optimist about such things.
Aisha, did that work for you?
Yeah, that, especially if it's just an hour, then I can do that.
Okay, so 2 to 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the 31st.
So we need a motion to continue.
Yes,
I'll make a
please.
motion to continue for an hour on 2 to 3 p.m. on the 31st.
And a second?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. This meeting will be continued to the 31st at 2 p.m.
Thanks,
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'll keep working on my flow chart. Oh, it's going to be really complicated next time. I know. I see just how complicated it truly can be.
And tell that Steve Strom to get to work.
It's going to look it's going to look like the motherboard from your laptop. I mean,
Graphics and colors and memes and all those things.
We want a laser show, Terry.
Yeah, that's right. And sound effects, right? You click on stuff, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming. I gotta go pick up my kid. See ya.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.